except Helen, so Helen can get started.
All right. So today we're here to talk about how to skip the holiday blues. I haven't updated this content for the pandemic, but I think, with that in mind as we go through the talk, I think most of it applies because I really tried to have a focus on sometimes situations where we have to manage expectations during the holiday times, which could mean like in a number of different ways, maybe we're not able to be with our families, but now more than ever be thinking about kind of using this pandemic lens as we go through the talk. So some things are going to be different. I think most of us will probably have, less holiday shopping to do because we're not going to be able to be in person doing gift exchanges and things like that as much as possible. But just so you know, I haven't actually changed a lot of content, but when it's relevant, I'll try to, adjust what I'm saying to acknowledge kind of the unique holiday season we're going to have today. So my name is Helen Beeman. I'm an LCSW. I'm currently your older adult behavioral health specialist. I cover Linn-Benton counties primarily and also do some work in Lincoln County. And I've been doing this role for about 4.5 years now. Come to you today with a little over 20 years of experience in the medical, social, and human service fields. Cindy, I know that you've been on lots of my talks and seen me in person, but I'm not sure if I've met you, Linda. So learning objectives for today, we're going to first talk about how our thoughts get in the way of feeling good. So I'll talk a little bit about some basic concepts. And really, a lot of this talk, at least in the beginning, is giving you a foundation of how to understand that connection between the way that we think, sometimes our irrational beliefs that feel like, they're true thoughts, but how that really impacts our mood, no matter if we're going through something good or going through something challenging. And then we'll shift into looking at how we can manage our expectations. So this really looks like really being aware and then changing the way that we're thinking so that our experience of the holiday season feels different. So it's kind of about controlling your controllables and managing your thoughts and your emotions so that you experience less distress around the holiday season as much as possible, considering that it's one of the most stressful times of the year. All of these things are based on cognitive behavioral theory, which is just a theory that talks about the belief that we really do have a lot of control about how we feel and how we experience what happens to us based on controlling and managing our thinking patterns. So after we talk about managing expectations, we'll talk about straightforward strategies for coping with some of the things that we run into in the holiday season, and then we'll look at specific resources for self-care. So again, we're shifting into this foundation that I want to lay down before we move into like actual holiday stuff. So on this screen, there's a picture of two men, Edward Sapir and Benjamin Lee Whorf. I put this in because they were the two people that created this theory of linguistic relativity. And this theory states that the words we use and how we structure our speech impact our thoughts, experiences, and how we view the world. So some examples that I've put together, it's just literally this basic concept of like, if we use one word versus this word, in the way that we think, or if we change one word in the way that we speak to someone or phrase something, that our words have so much power and impact on our feelings and our experience of what's happening. So an example would be if you say, oh my gosh, the holidays are so stressful, right? When you're talking to a friend. And if you were self-aware, you could think before it comes out of your mouth, stressful is pretty emotionally loaded, right? And we could change that word to challenging, right? Which most of us, that inspires kind of a different response. Stressful, we usually think, ugh, that sounds awful. And then challenging, some of us experience that word as, we'll maybe become more motivated to rise to the challenge or accept the challenge. And so you could say either the holidays are so stressful, or you could say the holidays are so challenging. But the idea when we apply this theory of linguistic relativity is that if we even make a simple word swap in our thoughts around the holidays, or how we maybe vent to someone about the holidays, it actually could shape us having a less stressful experience. The next example that I have is demand versus opportunity. So if you're thinking about maybe, you know, you've got an adult child or you've got grandchildren or any family member that's saying, you know, they're demanding that I make these pies, you know, to bring over for dinner or whatever. If you think about the word demand, it's kind of slimy. It has a negative connotation. It feels very differently. It feels like someone's making us do something, which most of us get a natural reaction to a word like that, or even, you know, that being in our thoughts. And so if you swap that out with something like opportunity, you can say, you know, this family member's giving me the opportunity to make all of these pies. So some people get stuck with this because they're like, you know, you're distorting what's really happening. Like if this family member is actually being demanding. My response to that is, this is about managing what we have control over. We don't have control over a family member who is making some pretty significant asks of us. What we do have control over is trying to modify our experience so that we feel less stressed or depressed or anxious or sad, whatever the case may be. So it's, you know, it is what it is. If you decide to be aware of the language in your world and you decide to make some modifications, so you're using really straightforward, not emotionally charged language, or not negative, you know, language in the way that you think and the way that you speak, it can really have a big impact on the amount of distress that you have. So the last example that I have on this page is have to versus get to. So I've had some pretty challenging jobs in my life. And I would find myself usually during a phase of actual, you know, burnout in tough jobs, where I would wake up every morning and think, you know, I'm just not going to go in, like I quit, right? And sometimes when I'm really in the thick of a burnout phase in the job, I will feel like I'm going to quit every single day, right? And it's just the way that I almost cope with this stress of a job that's hard for me. And so thinking about that as the example, like I would start to reframe things, like when I would get up in the morning and I'd say, I have to go to work. That feels awful. Now, if I change it, just a simple word swap, and I say, I get to go to work, that already injects a sense of kind of gratitude, and acknowledging that I'm actually lucky. Even if the job is hard, I'm lucky to have a job to go to, right? And so going from have to versus get to, for me, it's really night and day in how kind of self-talk feels. Or, you know, if I say like, oh, I have to go to this Christmas party, even if I speak it out loud, you still have that second where you realize like, that's not feeling very good. You can even just rephrase and be like, no, I get to go to this Christmas party, right? Because even when we have these challenging interactions during the holiday season, we usually look back after the stress has calmed down and we're thankful and grateful that we had these opportunities. You know, family dynamics can be really hard, but ultimately, you know, I think it's all worth it in the end. So it's thinking about how our language kind of injects negative experiences or negative emotions into something that we have a choice to kind of change our perception around so that we can modify that amount of distress. So expectations versus reality. We just switched to a different slide, so I've got a couple visuals here. One is just supposed to be funny. It shows a graph of like expectations in our life, and it's got like this straight arrow, you know, shooting up one clean line, and then right next to it, it's got this comparison, and it shows reality of how life goes, and it's just like, it's an arrow moving in the same direction, but it's just like this squiggly knotted mess. And then the picture next to it shows like a Whopper from Burger King, like how they put it in their advertisements or even on the menu, and it's just perfect. And I can tell you what I've learned about food advertisements and marketing is that they're usually made of like plastic or wax or things like that, not any food items. And then below it, it says reality, and it's just like this squashy, gross looking hamburger. So this slide is all about how us setting our expectations or setting the bar for how we think things are going to go, how we want things to go, sets us up to have distress fill in the gap. So where we set the bar, which is our expectation, versus what really happens, which is usually somewhat out of our control or completely out of our control. We're calling that reality. The space in between the expectation and what ends up happening is where we get ourselves into trouble. So what fills in the gap could be depression, feelings of sadness, feelings of disappointment, feeling anxious, things like that. So where do we get our expectations? Where do we get all of this information for how we want to set the bar, you know, where we set the bar? And it comes from a number of different things. So past experiences have a huge impact on where we like to set expectations. And this is just how things have gone in the past. So if, you know, for the last 25 years, you've had pretty, you know, distressing family dinners over the holidays, then your brain is already going to go into holiday season on this kind of Mayday phase where it thinks like, we already know that this is going to be awful. We already know it's going to be stressful. We already know we're not going to have a good night's sleep until, you know, January 1 rolls around. The next piece before we get expectations is what we heard things would be like. So if you've had, you know, 25 years of stressful family dinners for the holidays, but then one of your relatives calls you up and you really respect this person and they say, hey, things have been pretty kind of wonky in the past, but I heard that things are going to be really different this year. We're trying something new, and like everybody's been, you know, everybody in the family's been doing a lot of yoga this year, so we're all getting ready for like a way calmer experience this year. So that person, if you believe them and you know, put stock in what they have to say, that is going to have an impact on your expectations for this upcoming experience. On the flip side, if somebody calls you and say, oh my gosh, you know, so-and-so who hasn't been to family holiday dinner in 20 years is going to come this year and they are really going to shake things up. So any kind of influence from credible sources. The next piece is what we believe things will be like. And that's kind of a vague concept, but it's information that can come from a number of different elements, but what we really believe. And so everybody, you know, says like self-fulfilling prophecy or like, don't think negative, because then, you know, that can impact what's going to happen. But it is really true. And the concept behind that belief having an impact on how things will be and where we set our expectations, part of it goes back to this, you know, our thoughts have an impact on our experience of what happens. So if you believe things are going to go really, really well, you might walk into a situation like a stressful holiday dinner. If you're thinking, this is going to be totally different this year, I have a good feeling, then you might use a different lens in the way that you view maybe, you know, how it happens exactly the same way each year. But if you're looking at it through a different lens, a more positive lens, giving people a little more grace, being more understanding, being calmer, then things will feel differently. The last piece of where we get expectations is what we want things to be like. So this ties right into what we believe and what we want things to be like. So it's just basically rearranging our expectations. I always recommend if you can lower expectations or try to check your expectations at the door and just say, I don't know what it's going to be like, but I'm going to get through it, right? Or I'm going to try to enjoy myself no matter what happens, things like that. So be thinking about how your expectations play into that. And normally, because this image, I think, of the hamburger is so powerful, I always think about, you know, when we see an ad for that big Whopper and it just looks beautiful, you know, the tomatoes are perfect and shiny and the onions are perfectly cut and that burger is just perfectly seared. Now we go through the drive-thru and we're like, yeah, we want that. That looks amazing, right? And only $4 for that. And then you get up to the window and they hand you that squashy looking weird thing that does not even resemble the hamburger. I've thought about, do I write a letter to Burger King and say, hey, you're not doing yourselves any favors? Because if they put the squashy looking hamburger on the menu and we're like, okay, well, we still want a hamburger. That's our option, right? This is what we can expect. And then we roll up to the window and they're like, here's your squashy looking hamburger, exactly like the ugly picture on the menu. Most people would be like, we got exactly what we ordered. They create a lot of disappointment by kind of setting people up with this expectation of this plastic hamburger, this waxed hamburger, and then they hand us something completely different than what we think we're going to get. So manage your expectations, try to set yourself free of setting that bar, and just try to walk in and, you know, knowing that whatever happens, you're going to be flexible too. All right, this is a big concept. We're on to a next slide. It says shoulds, oughts, and musts. Oh my. A little ode to the Wizard of Oz here. But basically, this concept is really big in cognitive behavior therapy, or an offshoot, which is REBT, Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. And in therapy, we always talk to our clients about, you know, managing expectations and thinking about the language that we hear in our self-talk, or the language that we hear, you know, when we're speaking to others about what's going on. And so this is really referring to this really inflexible language that we might use. A lot of us use it. So if you say, you know, my daughter should have offered to pick up all the, you know, food for the dinner. Or, you know, my son shouldn't have expected me to make 5 pies, those things. If you hear those words cropping up into your thoughts or your language, you need to be on the lookout, because the concept behind this rigid language is that you're placing rigid or irrational demands and expectations on either yourself, onto others, or potentially the world around you. So when we, others, or the universe end up failing to meet those demands, expectations, or rules, we can experience unnecessary emotional distress. And again, the space in between what we expect versus what ends up happening is where we get that trouble. And I always tell patients or clients, stop shoulding on yourself. And they always, you know, flinch at me, and I'm like, I didn't say a naughty word. Stop shoulding on yourself. Stop shoulding on other people. You know, you need to be aware of that black and white thinking, that black and white language that leaves no space in how things actually end up happening in life, for them to be gray, or for them to turn out differently than what we expect. And that's where when we get stuck in that rigid way of thinking, that's where we end up feeling disappointed or sad or mad. All right, so this slide says if we don't bend, ... and then it shows an image of a candy cane breaking in half, right? We need to try to be as flexible as possible so that we don't break. So we're going into some ways, like I promised in our learning objectives, now that we have this foundation of understanding around cognitive behavioral concepts, I'm going to give you some skills for how you can increase flexibility and really fight against that black and white rigid thinking by changing the way that you think in some of these modifications that we offer. So one of the ways that we have what we call thinking errors or cognitive errors, denoting basically like some sort of irrational way of thinking. It's called all or nothing thinking. An example of this is, if it's not perfect, I'm a failure. Okay, so an example of this was when I was in graduate school, and I'd worked over a month on a really, really big research paper that I think was around 35 pages. It had taken me a lot of time, and I was really proud of it. And I ended up getting a grade back, and it was not 100%. I think it was maybe an A, you know, a really, really good grade in most people's minds. And I was so stuck in this all or nothing thinking that I kind of got into this anxiety spiral with it. It came back, it wasn't perfect. I had set the expectation and the irrational belief that because I had worked so hard and because I was so passionate about the work that I had done and turned in, and I expected that my professor was going to be so impressed and excited about it, that I would get this perfect score. So I set the bar as high as you can set it for yourself. I made irrational, rigid demands, not only for myself, but for my professor. And of course, she doesn't know, because I don't get to tell her how to grade my paper. And so for me, I set that bar, and then it comes back, and right, I didn't meet my expectation. So I went from, I didn't meet my expectation, so I'm a failure. Now this is a problem in the way that I'm thinking, because the gap in between is the gray area where I'm not a failure. I did really good. I just didn't get the grade that I had wanted. Okay. And so I experienced a huge amount of distress, despite the fact that I had gotten a great grade. The next thinking error is called focusing on the negatives. So this is kind of like if you've ever heard the term negative Nancy. Oh, she's a negative Nancy. Always, she's so negative. She focuses on only, the worst case scenario. This can be where you're stuck in thinking patterns where something like nothing ever goes my way. Like you kind of feel like you're a victim to the universe or to other people, or just things just constantly go wrong for you. Okay, so things do go wrong in life. Sometimes people treat us poorly. Sometimes we have bad luck, things like that. But there's almost no way that we can live our whole lives with nothing ever going our way. So inherently that is irrational. Should statements, okay? We talked about this in the slide earlier. Don't should on yourself. So something like this would look like Christmas dinner should always be at my house, okay? This belief, this made-up rule, okay? We call them traditions, but they're made-up rules about how things should look and how things should go. Causes a lot of distress if someone ever challenges that. And the last example of thinking errors is catastrophizing. So believing in the worst case scenario. Okay, so this is when we just have that mindset where we're like, I'm going to go to dinner and the turkey's going to catch on fire and I'll probably get into a fight with my, adult son. Okay, it could happen, but thinking like that all of the time is just going to cause you a tremendous amount of stress. So there's an image here that says, put your positive pants on. All right, so just to recap cognitive behavioral theory, this is a diagram with 3 different colored circles, and it shows the process that we get stuck in, okay? So the first circle involves our thoughts creating our feelings, okay? So this could be like, nobody wants me to go to Christmas dinner, okay? And that thought bubble circles down to our feelings. And the feeling that thought creates is a feeling of being unwanted or being mad because we're so hurt. And then the feeling bubble moves to the behavior, and the behavior bubble states that the behavior reinforces our thoughts. So if we think no one wants us to come to Christmas dinner, and then it creates the feeling that we are unwanted or unloved, then we may act really nasty, or we may not go, and that leads us to that behavior, right? We made a choice based on our feelings. And then if we don't go, or we go to dinner, but we just get in there and we're crabby and we're thinking nobody even wants me here, then our behavior and how we act, or if we stay home, will then reinforce that thought, that belief that we are unwanted or unloved, or that no one wanted us there. And then we get caught in a cycle. So the neat thing about cognitive behavioral theory is that you have control over the red bubble, which is the top bubble with the thoughts creating feelings. You can modify your thoughts to shape or impact your feelings. This isn't perfect. Bad things do happen, but we have to acknowledge that our thoughts have so much power over our feelings and then our behavior, and we can get stuck in a cycle. So my advice to you is create a thought cycle that is positive and rational. All right, so enough about the problem, okay? What do? So the first thing that we need to do is just increase self-awareness. We need to start by recognizing our thoughts, kind of tuning into our self-talk, tuning into the words that we say when we talk to other people about things, exploring our beliefs, and reevaluating our own values and goals. Some ways to change our thinking, okay? The first one is called but statements. So we're basically going to identify an irrational thought, okay? So I have an example coming up. So we want to just use a but statement to make the irrational thought a little bit more rational. So this works well if you are engaging in all or nothing thinking errors, which is the very black and white, I didn't get an A+, so I'm a failure. It makes you more flexible in your thinking. It creates space in your brain to acknowledge that gray area. So an example of this is, if it's not perfect, I've failed, right? You still get to keep that original irrational belief, and then you stick the but in there, 1T, but I gave it everything I had. Okay, so we went from, I didn't get a perfect grade, so I'm a failure. And the way that we modify that in our brain, if it's not perfect, I've failed, but I gave it everything I've had, right? You're just kind of wedging your foot in the door of that irrational belief to start making your thinking more flexible. The other coping skill is called catching your shoulds, okay? So we want to acknowledge any rigid or irrational demands and then try rephrasing it. So the example here is, my daughter should follow our family traditions. However, she may want to start some new traditions of her own. Now, this example is a very common one that I hear about, and it can be very painful when we start to see our family traditions change. I encourage everyone to keep an open mind, because family traditions are very special, but there's no rule about revisiting them and acknowledging how families and values and things can change and even become better, become more special in the ways that they're modified. So how to avoid feeling blue during one of the happiest times of the year. Normally I'd play you a video. I don't think it'll run right now, but it's a little link, and it's Charlie Brown, and it's the Christmas special. And he's sitting here, they're outside and it's snowing, and he's hanging out with Linus, and Linus has his blue blankie and they're talking. And Linus basically just says, you know, Charlie Brown, out of all the Charlie Browns, you're the Charlie Browniest. Just saying, you know, that Charlie Brown is so negative about the holidays. He really, really makes his experience of the holidays almost completely doomed just by the way that he thinks everything is going to be awful. Okay, the first thing we can do, and we just kind of touched on this, is acknowledge your feelings. Show yourself some grace. If you're feeling sad around the holidays, know that you are among many, right? The holidays bring with it a lot of mixed emotions, a lot of really tough emotions. We're in a pandemic, so there's a chance that people sitting around our table at the holiday time is going to be maybe, you know, half of what it used to be, maybe even less. Maybe we'll be by ourselves during the holiday season so that we don't spread illness or potentially get sick ourselves. It's going to be tough. And I know that everybody can get through it. And that's something that we need to remind ourselves of, is that, you know, we're doing these things and taking these precautions because we love our family and our friends so much, and we want to all be safe and healthy. If you've experienced loss recently, or you realize an old loss is coming up for you around the holiday time, that's also very normal. You need to let yourself grieve. You need to be able to express your feelings in whatever way is comfortable for you, okay? And just know that it is absolutely unnecessary to force yourself to try to be happy just because it's the holiday season. I'm not saying let yourself fall into a huge pit of despair, but if you feel sad, it's okay for you to feel sad. Okay, and if there's family members that are like, I don't want to deal with that right now, find somebody that is your safe space, okay? Or take the time with yourself to do what you need to do to feel better, okay? It's not realistic that you're going to be happy during the holiday season just because, you know, we say on the calendar that it's supposed to be all fun and games. A holiday season is really stressful, and it's a time where we, you know, look around the table, even not during a pandemic, and we notice who's not around the table anymore. We notice how things have changed. So it can be really hard. The next one is reach out. If you feel lonely or isolated, which we all pretty much do at this point, it can be compounded because of the holiday season. Seek out supports for yourself, okay? If you are part of a big friend group or faith-based community, if you're part of a volunteer group, things like that, get in contact with people that can help you and use those resources. If you need to, try to figure out a way that you can volunteer or contribute during the holiday season, and see if you can create new meaningful friendships. Be realistic, okay? So the holidays don't have to be perfect, or they don't have to be just like last year, okay? As families grow and change, traditions and rituals often change as well. So choose a few important traditions to hold on to and be open to creating new ones. For example, if your adult children can't come to your house, find new ways to celebrate together, such as sharing pictures, videos, utilizing video chat like Skype or FaceTime. I always think about like, hey, you know, grandma's 90-something years old, and the tradition is that grandma always makes dinner for like 50 people. Well, let's offer it up and see if grandma is a little bit tired of cooking a feast for, you know, a whole horde of people, and see if we want to split it up between other family members. Set aside differences. This is something that is sometimes extremely challenging, but it is so incredible when you think about the potential payoff. So try to accept family members and friends as they are in general, as they are during a time of high stress, during the holiday season. Even if they don't live up to all your expectations, We need to set aside grievances or any kind of active, disagreements that are happening between family members. And you can agree to discuss them after the holidays, okay? But don't try to set up a time, when your, great uncle gets to dinner, we're gonna go in the back room and we're gonna hash it out so that we can have a good dinner. That is not a realistic expectation. Don't even take that chance. Set things aside, come in with a clear slate, and you can handle those things after the holiday season is past and people have recovered and have the capacity to have meaningful and productive conversations. So also try to show grace to other people and yourself. Be understanding if other people are getting upset or if they're distressed when something goes wrong, burnt turkeys, things like that, a pie that falls on the ground when you're headed to the dinner table. All of these things, they just happen. So being able to be flexible and turn a bad situation into something more positive, acknowledging that everyone is under the stress of the holidays. Stick to a budget, okay? The last thing we need to add on to our plate is worrying about money during the time of the holidays. So before you get online and do any of your shopping, whether it's for food, whether it's for gifts, or whether it's even for, wrapping paper and bows and things like that, I mean, that itself can really add up. Make sure that you plan out what a budget is that will work for you, that won't make you feel stressed, okay? And remember, we oftentimes just naturally, especially if we're kind of the gift giver type, we'll get into this mood where we really want to have like maybe the best gift or the biggest gift for a grandchild. This concept of like, we want to try to buy happiness with maybe an avalanche of gifts. We need to remember, age-old adage, it's the thought that counts. Okay, some cost-effective gift-giving alternatives include giving homemade gifts or starting a family or friend gift exchange. If you have a large group of people that are exchanging gifts, it's not realistic to try to get everyone a gift, even if it's a small amount. Just do a gift exchange. That way you can focus more money on something more meaningful for one person. Plan ahead, okay? So manage your time. In any situation, this can really help alleviate stress or prevent stress. So especially for the holidays, they come up quick, and then it's just kind of you're in this huge fury. And so set aside specific days for shopping, for baking, if you're gonna be contributing to food, visiting friends and other activities. So you can plan your menus, you can make your shopping lists, and you can do those a little bit ahead of time, especially if you're doing baking ingredients that are stable to just hang out on the counter until your baking day comes up. We just want to try to prevent that last minute scramble to go to the store and get forgotten ingredients, which a lot of people are going to be flooding the grocery stores all with our masks on, trying to go grab those last ingredients. Also be sure to line up help for party prep and cleanup. If you are hosting, if you're actually going to have people come to your home this season, you need to ask for help ahead of time and get people committed, right? Figure out maybe a list. If you're a list person, figure out, are we doing decorations? Are we going to set up the table ahead of time? Like, what do we need to have happen to get the space ready? And how can you break up those kind of chores or things that need to have happen into a list, and then how can you assign them to the appropriate person? If you need, something, furniture moved or a table put together with the leaves added or something, like obviously that chore is not going to be assigned to a 12-year-old grandkid. You're going to need to ask somebody else. So just figure out what needs to be done. Also for cleanup, right? Don't set yourself up to, okay, well, I've always made the whole meal and hosted the whole meal, and then I also have been in the kitchen for 4 hours afterwards cleaning up by myself. No, that is not okay unless you really, really like it. Okay, so for some people I know, like my grandma Helen, her peace and calm was in the kitchen after a big family meal. She was just alone with the sudsy water and the dishes. So if that's the case, you don't have to give up your cleaning rituals. But in general, think about the things that you feel comfortable, delegating out so that everybody is involved and so you are not responsible for everything. That leads us into learning to say no. Okay, so saying yes when we should say no can leave you feeling resentful and overwhelmed, even when it's really kind of on us that we agreed to things that we didn't want to do. Family and friends will understand if you can't participate in every gathering or activity. And, reading that out loud, I think, no, sometimes my family and friends have not been understanding. But you know what? it's up to us to take care of ourselves. So if they're not understanding, that's something that they're going to have to work through. If you're not feeling comfortable going to all these events, especially for safety reasons this season, try to remove something else from your schedule to avoid overload, okay? So say no. If you can't say no, you need to modify your schedule so that you're not overloaded. Boundaries are very important in this process. Don't abandon your healthy habits, okay? So holiday season, it kind of becomes a free-for-all. We tend to overindulge sometimes, which can add to stress and guilt, especially if we're not feeling well or we're eating or drinking things that we don't normally have, and it just makes our bodies and our brains not feel so good. Maybe it impacts our ability to get good sleep, things like that. So making sure that you are maybe having some healthy food or drinking some water before you go to a big party, so that you don't overindulge. Make sure that you set aside time to get to bed at a normal time. If you have to get up super early for something, make sure you block out that time in the evening the night before so that you're not kind of burning it at both ends. And then keep your energy up by incorporating some regular physical activity during the day, even if it's just popping outside, throwing on a raincoat and getting yourself, a little bit of walk to reset. Take a breather, make some time for yourself. Okay, we know that just 5 to 10 minutes alone without distractions can help a person refresh and reset so that you feel better able to handle whatever comes up. So find something that reduces your stress by clearing your mind, slowing your breathing, something that restores your inner calm. So this can look differently for each one of us. Some options include taking a walk, listening to music, or reading a good book. So seek professional help, okay? So if all the things are not working or it's just your coping strategies have overwhelmed you, you may find yourself still feeling persistently sad or anxious, irritable, hopeless, or plagued by physical symptoms. Okay, if you're experiencing significant sleep difficulties that are different from normal and unable to face your daily routine. Okay, these symptoms last for more than 2 weeks, you need to talk to your doctor, or if you're connected to a mental health professional, seek extra help. So I'm not sure if you have a piece of paper and a pen, but these slides will be available to you. I've got this slide here with David Romprey, Oregon Warm Line. This is a peer-run program. It's a warm line, so if you're in a mental health crisis, this is not an appropriate line to use. If you are lonely, feeling frustrated, need an ear to talk to, this would be appropriate. The number is 1-800-698-2392, 1-800-698-2392. If you are in crisis or you know someone is in crisis and having scary thoughts, thinking about potentially hurting or killing themselves, we have the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. These are folks that you can call at any time. It's free and confidential, and they will make sure to keep you safe during that time where you're having those scary thoughts, and then they will get you connected to resources that you need to feel better. This number is 1-800-273-8255. It's 1-800-273-8255. And the friendship line. This is a warm line. Again, it's free and confidential. It's run by peers, so these are older adults. Any person age 60 years of age or older can call. Any adults with disabilities 18 years of age or older can call. And any caregiver can call and use this line. This is an ear to listen to. And the number for this is 1-800-971-0016. That's 1-800-971-0016. All right. So in summary, we need to take control of the holidays. Don't let the holidays become something you dread. Instead, we need to take the steps to prevent the holiday stress and depression that can descend, and learn to recognize your holiday triggers, such as financial pressures or personal demands, so that you're better able to manage them before they lead to a meltdown. With a little planning and good self-care, you can find peace and joy during the holidays. And